Cool. Hi everyone. Welcome and thank you for coming. Welcome to the Sable Radio Roots Out of Radio panel discussion. My name's Sophie Okonkwo. And for those who don't know, Sable is an online radio station and creative studio based in Leeds. So we do workshops, podcast production, audio visual stuff, creative production, education, and some curation. And today I'm joined by Tabitha Thorlu-Bangura and Amani Dauda. And Tabitha is creative director at NTS, and Amani is a project manager for Spotify's flagship podcast, Who We Be, as well as working at BBC Radio 1 and BBC 6 Music. Do you guys just want to introduce yourselves a little bit more?
Sure. So my title actually is
no,
it's okay. It's editorial assistant for We Are Grape, who one of their biggest clients is Spotify, who I work on for Who We Be Talks podcast, their flagship show.
And I'm Tabitha. I'm creative director at NTS. I kind of oversee the programming team and kind of do the creative strategy and programming, and overseeing a bit of the production for the brand partnerships that we do at NTS. And I also do a bit of curation and sort of music supervision on the side as well.
Cool. So the first question I wanted to ask you is, what were your big influences growing up? Were you watching Channel U? Did you have family influence? What kind of started to shape your ambitions?
I wouldn't say there was any one standout sort of music influence growing up. My uncle loved reggae and dancehall and would always play it on a Sunday when cleaning the house. So I think that's definitely influenced my music taste, but I also listened to crap indie music as well. I think the internet shaped my music taste a lot. I remember being on LimeWire a lot, and I think a lot of my generation would say the same thing. It really influenced me kind of listening to a lot of different music genres and not sort of being penned in by the area that I grew up in or the people around me. I could kind of go beyond. That would be it in terms of kind of music influences, I think.
Nice. Mine wasn't as, adventurous in the sense that I was pretty much influenced by my surroundings. So I'm from East London, and Channel U was a big part of my childhood. So that, along with the fact that my dad was a music journalist when I was a baby, and then he obviously had me and my older brother and realised he wanted to have something a bit more secure, because at the time there wasn't that much money in it. You kind of did it out of the love, unless you was writing for a big established rap magazine. He wasn't always kind of given that same set security that you could get from traditional roles now, and even what I'm doing now. So he then went on to do architecture, but I grew up in a house full of records, and I was always so inquisitive, why have we got so much music in our house? And then I think one of the first birthday presents I remember, maybe I was 3 or 4, was a cassette player. That's showing my age. But I had a Jay-Z Hard Knock Life cassette, and I remember that was just so integral to my love for music and what I then went on to kind of listen to when I could buy my own CDs and stuff.
Do you remember what your first CD was?
Yes. I'm a Rihanna stan. It is her first album. I think it's called no, it's not called Rihanna. What is it? My brain's gone black. The one with Ponderina playback, basically. I think it's called Music from the Sun. Music from the Sun.
I think my first CD was a Lupe Fiasco album, which is kind of embarrassing. Also, no, actually, I think that was the first CD I went and bought, but my first ever CD my uncle had to buy for me and bring home, and it was Red Hot Chili Peppers. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice. Cool. So how did both of you get started in the industry, and what was the route towards maybe a more sustainable kind of career?
There you go.
Tabitha, do you want to go first?
I've gone first on all of them.
I just going back and forth at this point, so if I just I'll leave you to.
So I actually went to Leeds Uni, and I was always just a big music fan. I studied English, but I was always a big music fan. So I just got involved in extracurricular stuff at Leeds. So I did Leeds Student Radio, and I also was the music editor for the Leeds Student newspaper. So that was cool, kind of gave me a bit of insight into music journalism and also just learning a little bit about radio production and presenting. I was more a presenter, really. And whilst I was on air, someone reached out and said, "Oh, my friend's just started a radio station. Like, you should join," which was NTS. But at the time, I was second year of uni, I think. So I didn't actually start working at NTS. I just became a fan, and I didn't actually start working at NTS until a couple of years later when I graduated. Went to Stockholm where I got really into, I did a year studying in Stockholm where I got really into electronic music. And then I worked for a booking agency for a few months after that in Berlin, like a dance music booking agency. So yeah, I had kind of bits and pieces of different music experience before I graduated. And then it was literally probably a couple of weeks after I graduated, and NTS posted a ad for like an editorial assistant, which I thought was perfect for me because I was like an English graduate and really into music and a really big fan of NTS. And I was actually the first person who emailed after like the ad went out, like mega keen. And actually on the side, I'd been writing for a blog called Truant, which is like an electronic music blog. So I was, at the time, I was like a staff writer there, and I had just written a piece about NTS, which the guys at NTS who kind of the bosses, Sean and Femi, they had like Google alerts on for NTS, and so they'd read my article. So when I went to chat to them, they'd like read the article and kind of knew a bit about me. So I started out as an editorial assistant, but we never really, I mean, the plan was always to kind of have a bit more of an editorial arm for NTS, like on the website. The site looked completely different back then. But yeah, Femi doesn't like flying, and at the time we were doing quite a lot of music festivals, like broadcasts from music festivals. So he said, like, you should just go out and do these broadcasts, even though I couldn't do any production at all. And he was like, yeah, you should just go in the studio and teach yourself how to do it, and then like fly to wherever it was, Poland. At the time we were going to Unsound Festival quite a lot. So I started doing external broadcasts. I was like the external broadcast manager for a while, and sort of through that started overseeing the partnerships. It was less of them at the time, but working on the kind of external collaborations that we did at NTS, and programming our events. So I programmed most of the NTS events for quite a few years. Femi used to do more of the ones in the US, and I'd do more of the ones in the UK and across Europe. And yeah, what did I do after that? Then I was like partnerships director, and then sort of during the pandemic, I kind of shifted to be creative director. So working with the different creative teams, which I've kind of always done, and kind of connecting the dots. Femi calls me the scaffolding of NTS, which is obviously very flattering. But yeah, connecting the dots between the different teams. So working with the production team very heavily, of course, programming team, and the partnerships team. Yeah.
Cool. Very cool and very good answer. The original question was, how did we get started, right?
Yeah, like how did you get started, and how did you then move into a more sustainable like career as a result of that?
Got you.
No, go on.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. I got started by, oh my gosh, doing so much unpaid work. Like,
That's the bit I
this is the
forgot,
side
yeah.
that no one tells you about, which I want to emphasize because I was literally talking to my friend about it yesterday, like, because we were having like a reflective moment on where like our lives are at now, and I was like, the beginning stages, no one kind of prepares you in the creative world for that, or maybe they do, but they don't glamorize it. Like, you kind of see the end results, like, oh, what you do is so cool and so creative, and it is, but that initial, well, how many years was I working? Pretty much for 3 years for me, and some people I know are still going. Like, it does vary, like no one's journey is the same. Someone can do it for 6 months, land an opportunity like that, and someone else could be 3 years in and still waiting for that like break. So yeah, I worked at Represent radio station, which is a youth-led radio station in Brixton, but it originated in
Peckham.
Yes. And I was a broadcast assistant originally, so I came in for like work experience on a day, and the station manager was like, oh, like you're really enthusiastic, I should introduce you to someone called Henry. Henry now being like the flagship presenter for Who We Talks. I was like, yeah, cool. So we spoke. She had like a quiet slot. I think she had like a 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. slot on a Friday. Like, wasn't the most popping radio show. She'll admit that still today. But he was like, you know, what really helps build people's shows is having like the right team. So whether that be producers, broadcast assistants, because it means that the presenters can focus on making sure that they give their best possible show, and you kind of focus on the running of the show, the guest booking, basically a lot of the things that I kind of do till today. So we got assigned together. We really helped kind of elevate the show after a year, and we were offered a drive time slot. Then, yeah, it was just like a domino effect. I feel like once you kind of get one opportunity within this world, I don't know if I can speak for you, Safa, with that, but like it creates new windows. So like as soon as I was able to slap that I'd done work for ITV and the Royal Wedding on my CV, the next thing I applied for was that bit easier, because it was like, okay, well, they trusted you, maybe there's something here. So I did that. I was also doing some voluntary work at the BBC news system, because when you're a freelancer, you can kind of like reach out to all of their competitors and show that, yeah, well, I've picked up skills from here, this is what they got me in for, you might want me to do the same. So I was doing that. And then I also, after that experience at ITV, at the Royal Wedding, there was like camps almost of all the news outlets. And I knew someone who I'd worked previously at ITV with, who was working with Sky. And I was like, oh, I'd love to be in touch with your boss, because like I'm not getting enough gigs, or I'm not getting enough work at ITV. I'll do stuff with Sky if they want me. So then he connected me with his boss. I didn't hear anything for ages. And then around Christmas, because that's usually a good time for freelancers, because whilst everyone's on holiday, they need like interim staff. She said to me, like, she's got some opportunities, do you want to come in? So I did that then. And then there was a role of a script assistant, and she was like, it's kind of like a monthly rolling thing, so if you want to do it, the window's there. And then I was like, right, I can finally quit my pub job, because I was like, if I'm doing this monthly, then it means I don't need to do that. And the hours I was doing at the pub, like, it didn't really work around news hours. So I left, and I was like, right, Amani, make this leap of faith that once you've kind of left the hospitality world, just trust in the process, and hopefully like more opportunities will come. And they were like all at work, like, are you sure you want to like quit if it's not a permanent role? And I was like, it'll be fine, it has to be fine, done it now. Anyway, it was fine, because I've never obviously had to go back, thankfully. And yeah, then after that opportunity of the Royal Wedding stuff, Henry was picked up by Spotify to do Who We Talks. They said, do you know any producers? And she said, well, the person who produced my show for the last 3 years on Represent Radio, Amani, is great. Went for an interview with We Are Grape, and that's where I am now. I got the role, left Sky after like maybe 2 years with them, because it was like a 2-year contract. So it kind of worked out perfectly in the sense that as that opportunity was closing, this new one had cemented with Spotify, and I've really enjoyed it. So yeah, I'm really sorry that answer was so long.
No, it was good to hear the detail. I think also some of the stuff you said was really important in terms of like being brave. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes it is just like, you just have to be brave and kind of take the risk. But also, I think like with Amani's story, you can hear how often you said yes to things.
Yeah.
I think that's a massive part of it. Like not turning your nose up at anything, even if it's not exactly the thing you want to do. Like if it's adjacent to or connected with it, like it can still be really useful. I didn't really particularly care about producing broadcasts, but it meant that then, one, I learned how to do it, which is super useful. But two, like going out, then when I was out there, I was actually producing the broadcast and also interviewing people on air, et cetera, and it just means like, it just gives you an insight into the different aspects of the industry you want to work in. So the fact that I kind of had to do so many different roles at NTS is why I'm in the position I am now, because I know like in detail every part of the company, basically.
100%. I think that's a great point that Tabitha's touched on, in the sense that like you don't know almost what you're going to end up, well, unless you're very like fortunate. I don't know if you necessarily know exactly what your role can be in 5 years' time, and having a wide skill set means that you don't necessarily have to be confined to things. Like my degree was in social policy and sociology, but I knew when I did that degree, I was doing it purely because I like really enjoyed sociology in school, like the study of society, politics, class, race, inclusion, are all things that are like dear to my heart. And in a weird way, they do actually help me now because like for my dissertation, I had to do like interviews and get used to public speaking, like things like that. They all kind of have like they're all contributing factors to like what you end up doing later down the line. And I did consider like studying broadcast at uni, but I was also advised that you can do a lot of it outside and it's actually about your experience. Everyone gives you different advice. Like that's one thing. There's no rule book, I don't think.
Yeah, I do think, well, especially now that there are so many internet radio stations, you don't necessarily have to have done a degree in radio.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the people at NTS, a bunch of them did other degrees and then did postgrads at Goldsmiths and did like a year or 2 years in radio at Goldsmiths. But loads of the people didn't. Loads of the people who are producers now didn't have any radio experience at all. And they just volunteered in the NTS studio and were trained in the studio and then progressed that way. And also just in terms of saying yes to things and being open-minded about the different types of experience you can get. There are people who work at NTS now in the office who do programming who started out as producers. So it's definitely, to me, I feel like it's an industry where it's possible to kind of sidestep and be flexible and like touch in different roles depending on how open you're willing to be.
I agree, and just try everything. Like I know you need to get to your question.
No.
We kind of diverted, but yeah, I think trying everything is so key because you could really think you want to do something, and I thought journalism was for me. I was like, yes, it makes sense. It's in the family. But when it actually came to it, and I was working in news, I was like, this could be really depressing. Like, I don't know if I want to do this forever. And yeah, there's just so many avenues that you can take, but still kind of cross over. Like you said, sidestep as opposed to step away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think it's really important to just try new things as well, because there might be things out there that you think that you don't like or that you think you can't do.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you give it a go, you know, that's not the case. So like on that, like knowing what you know now, like would you go back and change anything to like make the journey smoother? Because I'm kind of aware that some people can't or like don't have the capacity to kind of give up their time voluntarily. So like what advice would you give? And it doesn't have to necessarily be advice to people, it could even be advice to organisations that are asking young people to work for free, you know?
I would just say don't, because yeah, I also was like an intern and I think I didn't get paid for a year and then I got like living wage or something. And I was working like a cafe at the time in Camberwell. But I think not having paid positions just means that only middle class people can get into the creative industries. And obviously that has an incredibly damaging effect on culture at large. So yeah, but obviously that's not something that you guys can be in control of. I would also say, in terms of paid and unpaid work, don't work for an actual company for free because it's just illegal, frankly. But thinking kind of more laterally, so for example, Truant's blog, nobody at Truant's was getting paid. It's something Soraya started for the passion of electronic music, and we all did it as a labour of love. I think if you're working with your peers and you're on the same level, and is something that's a passion for you, and you're able to do it on top of, hospitality work or whatever it might be, then that is something that's definitely worth doing because you can learn together. So there isn't anyone above you telling you that you're doing it wrong. You can figure out how you guys want to do it together. And also you can grow together. Like Soraya is still a dear friend and we're both now in the music industry and can kind of advise each other and kind of support each other still. So I think, I think if somebody's above you, then you shouldn't be working for them for free. But if they're adjacent to you, you can think kind of horizontally, and then it's worth kind of putting in your time for the passion of what you're doing and to also get experience.
Yeah, I think all I'll add is, like, that being said though, if I didn't do some of those things, I probably wouldn't have been here. So it's almost like give and take. Like maybe I was always advised, put benchmarks and like time frames in how long you do something for. If you find that you're working for free or very minimal for more than a year and a half and there's not real opportunities coming through, maybe it's not the right one and you should like look elsewhere. I don't think you should necessarily be opposed to doing things out of the love of it. Like me writing for Link Up TV, that was because I actually really enjoyed it and I was learning a lot. I was getting to go to so many free gigs. Like I went to WizKid's first headline show at the Royal Albert Hall. It wasn't paid. I wrote up on his performance afterwards and I was like, I could do this. Free concert tickets. Like it's about what you take away from it, I think, and making it work for you. If it's not something that's going to be like detrimental to you, like maybe not affording your rent and like things like that have knock-on effects, then obviously do not do it. But if it's something that you can do additionally to, your hospitality or your side hustle almost, then do it.
If you're learning a lot as well, then it's always worth it. I still do stuff on top of my job because it's an interesting experience for me, or it's like somebody that I want to support or help, etc. And yeah, you always learn stuff. And even now, like saying yes to things, even though I'm like, I'm stacked, I'm really busy, but yeah, I always learn something from those situations and yeah, kind of get to explore different avenues in my career. So.
And lastly,
Go on.
coming to things like this is so important. Like, I was at every single networking event. I saw that as even an extension of my work, to be honest, because if I had finished like work early or I don't know, I had a weekend where I saw there was a networking thing happening, like I wouldn't have got, for example, Ronke from ITV's card if I didn't go to one like networking event once, or like whenever I saw things on Eventbrite that were like, I don't know, panels and creative related, and it was free, I would go because you just never know who's in that room, who could, even if they can't directly help you, but sway you in the right direction. So, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it can become about who you know, can't
Oh,
it?
absolutely. Nepotism is wrong.
Relationships and friendship. Nepotism. It's true. So, like, kind of on the kind of fostering relationships with people, what role have mentors played for you? Because I know Amani, like, I know you have some experiences being a mentor as well, don't you?
Yeah,
For
it's
the
so
Women After Greatness.
Yes.
So,
I'll start with this one then.
go on.
I have mentors, and I've also recently become a mentor. So my main mentor is Sophie Okonkwo, who has recently become the head of music for Spotify UK and Ireland. She was someone who was obviously like through a client first, so when I was working for We Are Grape, she kind of just, I don't even know if she knows I call her a mentor, but like we've become a mentor now because like if it wasn't for you and like your journey and showing that it's possible, especially as a black woman in a heavily white male middle class dominated industry, I wouldn't know it was possible to like reach these heights. And I always thought there was a glass ceiling just because of what I could see, and seeing like people like Safia Lebo as well, who is a BBC News reporter, Deseko. She was one of the first people to get me my BBC Focus on Africa work experience. Charlene White from the ITV, Ronke Phillips. There's so many people. Henry, who, even though she's not doing like the behind the scenes roles, if she didn't mention my name to the right person, I wouldn't have necessarily been able to be aware of the opportunities. So sometimes it's just like, you know, not being afraid to kind of introduce people or like mention the right person's name if you think you can help them, because even though you're not part of the final decision, it's like a lot of it's based on your reputation and the connections you're building and like vouching for someone, because in creative fields, it's not like you can be like, oh, this is, I don't know, the stats someone's reached. It's more about like, what are they like, what's the rapport, what's the working environments like with them, and yeah, that's what I found anyway. Okay.
I think that's great that you've had so many mentors. I don't really feel like I have standout mentors in that sense. I would say my colleague Marissa, who I used to work with at NCS, definitely helped mentor me and kind of guide me in my career, 100%. But when I was starting out, there were only 6 of us at NCS. It's a really small, it's even today a fairly small company considering our output. And yeah, when I started out, there were 6 of us, all guys, and me and Femi were the only black ones, and I was the only woman. So I kind of had to pull myself up by my bootstraps, as the kind of very dated saying goes. Yeah, I think today now I like try to mentor others. I've done like a bit of formalized mentoring with University of the Arts, but also just, you know, when I first started NCS, pushing for us to hire more women, pushing for like kind of more diverse team. Also just in terms of the actual DJs on the station, there were always like female DJs on NCS from day one. Some of them I'm sure you guys will know, like Moxie, who's been doing like a weekly show since the station started, but the gender balance was not as equal as it should have been when I started. So yeah, kind of pushing for that a bit harder at the start was quite difficult, because it was just a completely different climate, to be honest. And yeah, just trying to support other young women at NTS and like in the wider industries, and also through the projects that we do, which I'm sure we'll get onto. But yeah, because trying to kind of encourage other people to get into the industry. I think one thing that I would like to do more of, and that Amani kind of mentioned briefly, is kind of thinking about class a bit more often. I think like gender and race and sexuality are things that we kind of are used to kind of talking about in the media now, but in the UK I feel like class is still the elephant in the room. And even like a lot of the successful black creatives that you see now, like I know they're from like fairly wealthy backgrounds, even though they're like immigrants. And I think, yeah, we could kind of do a bit more in terms of getting people from working class backgrounds into the arts. So in terms of like future mentoring, I think that's something I would like to do a bit more of.
Go on.
I realised I forgot to talk about my mentees, who I met through a non-government organisation called Women After Greatness. If you can look them up, then that would be good, because they run, I think, they get a lot of funding, but they were really good in the sense that they connected me with like university students, as well as like postgrads who, like one of my mentees, Ray Hassan, she, when I first met her, was working for Apple as just like a tech consultant, but she was like, she's really keen to get into radio and to Spotify and do some like work experience. And I was like, well, we're in a pandemic, and these were the times where we were only allowed like skeletal staff, so I couldn't really get her like physical work experience, but I could only guide her through what I'd done in my journey. And now she works for Vamp PR, which like look after some talent from Nella Rose to Mariam Musa, Adiola, Patron, like a really, really good PR company, black-led as well, female-run. So it was really good to see kind of her path, because when I first met her, as I said, she hadn't really had any creative experience. And then my other mentee is still in her final year of university now, but she's planning on doing like her own documentary, and like everyone's just like thriving, and it's really beautiful to see. My final mentee, Erica, she has done like some voluntary radio stuff at No Signal Radio, which is an online radio station that launched in the pandemic. And she's not even from London, which I think is the key part to mention. When you're not from London, sometimes I feel like there's a like barrier and disconnect, because she felt like all the opportunities were kind of populated there, and she's from Oxford, so she was like, there's being from outside London, and there's also being like black and into the music I'm into, and there kind of not being as many opportunities. So for her to kind of take that courage to reach out to a London-based radio station and travel in and like be independent enough to get that work experience in like a very, very competitive field, I think is impressive. So never be kind of afraid to look for those opportunities, even if they're not like close to home.
I was just going to say, when you were talking earlier about networking, you do have to be quite brave, I think, to like go up to people. And I know like not everybody has, you know, that kind of personality to like go up and talk to a stranger or ask for their card or whatever. So I would say to like also network at events and just at things that you like. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal event, and you don't necessarily have to network up. You can also, again, like network horizontally and kind of ask people who are your peers, like what they're into and what they're working on, and if you can help them, or just like encourage each other, which maybe is like slightly less daunting than going up to like an exec, even though that's amazing if you can do it.
No, I think sometimes I'm too bold, I'm too creative. Another thing I used to do as well, which I don't know if I encourage, but I did it and it worked, was I'd just find people who were in like important roles, or not important, but like probably the decision-making roles on LinkedIn, and just like slide into their messages and be like, hi, can I introduce myself to you? Can I grab an email? And I actually had some response rates, like, honestly, and I feel like that felt like, oh well, if they ignore you, then they've never actually met me. I can't get the like in-person rejection. So yeah, whichever kind of works for everyone, it's different.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned like the more kind of informal ways of like networking, because I'd say I've done a lot of mine at like gigs or parties and just meeting people with similar interests to me really, and then linking other people through that. So Tabitha, you started talking a little bit about some of the projects that you do, and I know you did this big partnership with Netflix and Top Boy, kind of centered around education and workshops and kind of sharing knowledge with young people. So how important is it to have a social kind of aspect to your partnerships, and what kind of helps drive the creative partnerships that you make?
In terms of the drive of them, it really depends. Some things are kind of, we come up with ourselves at NTS. So for example, in the pandemic, we did a project that we called Remote Utopias, which was like an online festival. Feels like a little bit cheesy, but it was like a kind of, it was really like a radio festival with lots of different artists from all over the world doing not just radio shows, but also kind of more like soundscapes and sort of sound art pieces, some interviews, and we also had some sort of like film screenings as well that was part of it. And for that, we kind of raised money for the Global Food Banking Network throughout the whole of the broadcast. So that was just something that we wanted to do. We thought it could be a cool way to like connect people during the pandemic and also raise money at the same time. When we're working with like brand partners, we kind of come up with the concepts together. Usually they have something that they want to push, and we kind of figure out an interesting way to do an activation around that. So with Top Boy, Netflix were really keen to kind of be socially conscious with that, obviously like given the nature of the show. So they just came to us and said, we want to do something around the new season of Top Boy. Obviously it was like coming back after a long hiatus and people are really excited about it. But I was thinking about, I'm from like a working class background, and I was thinking about my cousins and relatives and like the people I know who don't necessarily maybe watch the show, but wouldn't really have any idea about what goes into it. So yeah, for that one, we thought it could be really cool to do a weekend of like talks and workshops and different experiences to show people like the other aspects of both the film and TV and also music industries. So it was stuff like learning how to, like a kind of crash course in sound engineering, specifically around like rap and like drill music. We had like stylists, we talked to producers, we talked to location scouts and just like all different aspects, like the cast and crew of Netflix, as well as people within the kind of NTS network who are more from a music background. So that one was probably one of my favorite projects that we've done. But we also do stuff that's kind of more direct, like Trying to think of things that I can mention. For example, with Jameson, they wanted to do something that was about connecting. So that was really like, obviously like Jameson, the Irish whiskey brand, but they wanted to do something that was about connecting. So we did a podcast that was kind of talking to people from different locations around the world who had like similar energies. I wouldn't even say genres, it was kind of just similar energies in their music, and having them kind of talk to one another about their local communities and how they like create music where they are and how they connect kind of internationally to do that. So that was like a kind of perfect project for NTS because we're obviously based in Dalston but very much global, with studio in LA, kind of pop-up studio in Shanghai, and then literally hosts in like pretty much every location. So that worked really well. So yeah, it really depends on like the specific project and like what we want to get out of it. There are a few that I've been wanting to do that are, again, just like a bit more conceptual and like sort of music driven in terms of like what the idea is about, rather than sort of concept driven like the Jameson one was or the Top Boy Academy one was. But yeah, we're still working on those. So coming soon, maybe.
Cool. So when you're working with like bigger brands, how do you kind of maintain the ethos of NTS?
I think it starts with like the first conversation. We're really lucky in that most of the time brands come to us, so they want to work with NTS. They like what we do. They like the music that our DJs play, and they see how powerful the community of DJs at NTS is. So they're kind of coming to us, and then so they're kind of more willing to be flexible, and they're excited about what we do. So that kind of makes things easier, I think. But yeah, it's about having the kind of initial conversation and figuring out what the direction is and making sure that that kind of fits with what we're doing. And also making sure that we're kind of programming like a diverse range of talent to feature on that project and paying them properly. Like it's a big part of why we do the projects that we do, is because it enables us to give money and opportunities to our DJs, and you know, not necessarily just the ones who are really established, but also kind of big part of the way that we program our partnerships is that we're kind of leveraging the more established artists in order to shine a light on the kind of people who are a bit more emerging and newer. Everyone gets really good fees, but it just means that you get the opportunity to be like exposed to an audience that you maybe otherwise wouldn't be, or even being flown out places. I remember a really cool project that we did for years, many years, was a radio tour with Carhartt, and it was like Carhartt, if you know like the clothing brand, made a exact replica of the NTS booth and like drove it around Europe, like to the different stores. So yeah, we've like brought out loads of the NTS DJs to that. We also did an amazing project. God, this is terrible. I'm forgetting the name of the hotel chain now. But it was a hotel in Mauritius, and we like flew our DJs out there to DJ. So yeah, it's like really, really great opportunity for us to give chances to emerging DJs.
And do lots of fun stuff along the way.
And do some sick projects. Yeah, that's the other thing, is like we get to do really cool stuff, especially with lots of the different partners we work with, to be honest. At the moment, we're doing lots of stuff with fashion brands, but in the past, we did a lot of work with kind of music tech. I think one of our favorite partners was Sonos, if you know the speaker, kind of wireless speaker brand, or semi-wireless. They were just really cool because we got to do stuff that was super conceptual. Like we did a project that was all about Berlin, and we had different DJs writing a kind of like musical love letter to Berlin, and we had a different range of people doing that. We did one project that was all about when Sonos came out with I think it was quite a limited range of coloured speakers. We did a project called The Sound of Colour, where one person did like the sound of blue and the sound of yellow. We also did like a World Cup for DJs. So we had people playing like their favourite music from their country and like having a battle, basically. I can't remember who, it was a Latin American country that won, I forget which.
That's really cool. Amani, so you worked on the Who We Be podcast for a while now. And like, what kind of stuff have you learned working on a production of that kind of scale, and like, were there any surprises?
Wow, always surprised in anything like, well, I wouldn't say live, but it's not live because I don't in radio anymore. But anything that kind of is time sensitive, you're always kind of on like, well, I was always on edge in the beginning because obviously when it relaunched for its season 3, it was in the middle of the pandemic. So like, oh my gosh, there was times where you'd have like guests be like, we've tested positive, we can't come in tomorrow. And I'm just like, oh, are you joking me? Because those aren't things you can really prepare for, even be like annoyed about because, you know, no one predicted COVID happening. It was just more being reactive. So kind of like, I don't know, having a reserve guest, so being like, you're kind of, we need you on standby basically. And even with presenters as well, there was one week, it was like the week before Christmas, not the Christmas gone, the one before, and like the camera person got COVID, then the studio engineer got COVID, and they're like, you might need to test for COVID. And I was just like, well, this is like unpredictable. Like that was one thing about, I think, the pandemic that just helped me prepare for the worst. Not, it sounds really bad, but like not prepare for the worst, but kind of always have backup plans in place, and be very organized because like it wasn't just like planning a regular show. It was planning a show that may not happen or may like it was so it was a lot to learn from, but like it was also really rewarding when things did come together because some of the best shows I had, like I'll give you an example. We had Ella May on the show recently for her album launch, and that was dependent on her flight coming in from LA in time, and it was just like, okay, if she doesn't come, who have we got as a reserve, and will it still work? Like there was just so many considerations that like we had to take into place. But I think once you can do that, you can kind of work in any environment, and with any kind of deadlines, because for us as a production company, it was like the presenters don't always need to know what's going on. Like you just need to find a solution, and then worst case scenario, inform them afterwards. But like I think one thing I learned about my role is that you kind of have to keep the clock ticking regardless of external things that might be happening outside of your control.
So is one of your main roles kind of deciding what guests go on the podcast?
I'd say guests, also the like features we do. So it's a bit different to radio, which was like obviously my background before, but you kind of like plan the show. So whether or not you want to like do like a cultural catch up with things that have happened throughout the weeks. And oh my gosh, in the pandemic, like obviously with like everything happening around BLM at one point, like we wanted to make sure that we're following like the cultural movements that were happening and bringing them to our conversation, because Who We Be like prides itself on kind of being like the voice of the generation, and Harry and Henry are really good in that sense. But it was just like at one point it was like, I remember the show plans being so heavy, I was just like, I walked away from news and I'm coming back to it, because we were talking about like end SARS movement and Congo is bleeding. Like it was a lot, but it was so important, I think, for the like time, because people would reach out and be like, that show really helped me. And that was when it felt rewarding, because it was like, okay, so people are listening, like, and people are taking in like everything that we're covering, and it's not just kind of like going over everyone's head.
And do you have a favourite guest that you've invited on the podcast?
Ooh,
Or is that a bit cheeky?
It's always my hardest question, because I just naturally gravitate towards like the international guests for some reason. I think it's because they always feel like way more, what's the word?
Exotic?
No, not even exotic. I would say like inaccessible, in the sense that you've actually flown over to join us.
It's like a special moment.
Yeah, and I like always appreciate it. So Beanie Man was like iconic, because I was just like, Beanie Man's on Who We Be, like that's crazy to me. I grew up listening to you, and when he was relaunched this album, we got him to say Who We Be, and it was so funny because like you can probably find the clip on Instagram somewhere. He wasn't saying it right, but it was like, we're gonna just let you have this moment because you're Beanie Man. Like who's gonna correct you? So yeah, I think Beanie Man, Kalani, because I was like a big fan of her when I was in uni, when she just started her career, and it was great to see like everything she's gone on to achieve. Idris Elba, that day I couldn't speak properly. I was talking to him and I was like, no words are coming out. Like, it's crazy. yeah, there's so many. The list goes on. Like, I'm really fortunate in the sense that like everyone I've kind of like looked up to, whenever we've kind of reached out to them, they've been like, yeah, of course, like we listen to who we've been. That makes me feel like everything we're doing is gradually building its reputation.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. Beanie Man in particular. So Tabitha, I just wanted to ask you about kind of, how can a platform like NTS help facilitate kind of a move into kind of like maybe a bigger institution? So like maybe Zaki is a good example of that, how she's kind of now doing the kind of audio documentaries on BBC and stuff.
Yeah, I guess it depends whether you're presenting or DJing on air versus working in the office or producing in the studio. I guess with both though, it's really about being open again and like being flexible and being up for doing different things and also trying new things. I think with Zakia, she was really kind of exploring her interests like beyond the music that she was playing and her other kind of like cultural interests. But I think with even like myself or like some of the other staff at NTS who've gone on, you know, I remember like Mei Lee, who actually came through NTS through the Create Jobs internship program and is now working like producing podcasts. Just sort of, yeah, being flexible, being open and being up for trying new things, working really hard and being enthusiastic, I think. And just, I don't like sort of policing people's tone, but like being up for making friends and being pleasant with the people that you're working with, I think is really important. And just rolling your sleeves up and helping out, like people always appreciate that. And also you get to learn more. But even now, like I'm, you know, like oversee a lot of what happens at NTS, but on Saturday when we had an event, I was still like helping move the speaker stacks and like picking up rubbish and wrapping cables at the end of the night. I think it's like really important to be able to work as a team, but it also means then you get lots of different experience. So yeah, I would say that's also how a lot of people have kind of like progressed both within and after NTS, is by being up for learning a bit more beyond their specific role. And the same for me as well, like a lot of the things that I've done outside of NTS have been like being up for doing things, but also exploring my passions outside of the company. So like doing a radio show, like I used to do a radio show on NTS, and that was how people kind of knew about me to offer me like events and like curation experience as well. So I did like curating nights for different like club night promoters, but also institutions like Somerset House. And yeah, I like did sort of, I was like curating residence at Somerset House for like 18 months. It was across the pandemic, so extended. But yeah, that was just through being a DJ, being a radio host, and like doing like my own club nights like outside of work, and just like, yeah, being passionate about what you do basically, even if it's maybe not necessarily getting you that much money, or yeah, it's not like necessarily like a formal paid job, but having stuff on your CV or portfolio like that shows that you're passionate about what you do, even if it's not necessarily like a long-term job somewhere, really like I think helps. Like, and it also just shows your taste. Like when I'm like looking at people's or listening to people's demos or submissions on NTS now, or like looking over CVs for different jobs that we have going, it's like I'm always interested in what people's passions are like around what their main job is, or like it doesn't really matter what you do if you can show that you're really passionate about the thing that you want to get into, I would say.
Yeah, I think one of the main things that's jumped out today from both of you is that it's important to have kind of like multiple interests. Like I kind of see that a lot now, like no one does one thing anymore. If you're involved in kind of like a creative scene. Amani, I just wanted to go back and like ask you a little bit more about Represent and like what kind of like what was like your role as like a content assistant? Like what kind of stuff did you get up to when you were there?
Sure. So my role kind of evolved at Represent. As I said, I was there for 3 years. So within the first year, it was mainly just focus on booking the week-on-week guests. It was the show once a week, and then also the show plan. So the games we'd do with the guests, the questions we'd ask the guests, the research prior to getting the guest on. So like writing a bio on them for the presenters that are like really concise, and also like some interesting facts, because most of the time, like if we got a guest on, they probably would be doing like a promo run for a new single. So it would be like, how would your questions differ from what other radio stations are going to get from them, or what they're going to tell the next person? And then also in terms of games, is it going to be something that shows another side to their personality or pushes them outside of their comfort zone? So it was based on like guest focused and question and show plan focused. And then when it became production based, that's when it was like almost sometimes manning the desk, which I kind of hated. I realized I'm not really good at stuff like that, which I think is important as well to kind of know what your strengths and weaknesses are. So when we started to broaden the team, and we got like a broadcast assistant involved too, I would be like, well, I know your strength is you're confident on the desk and like picking up if we're ever peaking, or for example, if, I don't know, a song came off air, like having a new song like on standby, like reserve, like if you're quite quick on your feet, I think live radio is perfect for you. I was more just like, oh, if I'm enjoying this, I could be like, oh my gosh, we're 3 minutes in and we haven't got the next song loaded. Like, yeah, you have to be very, very reactive. So that was what my role was like. And then when it also became production based, I would sometimes help like create things. So similar to what you do at NTS Tabitha, we would have sometimes like Adidas wanting to work with Represent. I remember one really, really cool event was when H&M was working with Represent, and we went to Manchester to do like a collab with Raheem Sterling. And that was really cool to me because it meant that like we were planning a show like on site, out as opposed to in the radio station. And those were always the like most rewarding for me, in the sense that when you've like de-rigged and everything and it's all gone together well, you can kind of like see the the rewards of your labor, as opposed to just like going into radio every week and it feeling like samey. So yeah, that was my role. I think I explained it well.
Cool. So we're going to have to wrap up soon, but I've just got one more question for both of you, and then we'll see if anyone's got any quick questions from the audience. Have you got any exciting work coming up?
No, we're both like super. No, I'm kidding. I worked on a film last year, and I did the music supervision for that film, and it should be coming out towards the end of the year. And then, yeah, there are a few really exciting projects that we're working on at NCS, but unfortunately not announced yet. But if you're going to be in London in August and September, actually, there are a couple in both months. Yeah, like keep an ear out, because there are going to be some big extended parties happening.
Cool.
I have nothing that I can actually discuss. So the best thing would be, if you're not already following Who We Be UK on Instagram, then definitely do, because that's where it'll be like announced first, and there's just like a lot of exciting things to come.
And thank you, Tabitha and Amani, for your insights.
Pleasure.
I really enjoyed chatting with both of you. I think we're all just going to hang out in here for a little bit now. I think we got Whooshy on the decks, have we? Yeah. So if everyone wants to just chill, hang out and chat, will you guys be here for a little bit? Can people maybe